The Pond Stranger, a terrifying summer night. I was 21, home alone in my parents' sprawling house, surrounded by trees and a tranquil pond. The house was perched right on the edge of this serene pond, our backyard sloping right into the water. Across the pond sat a quiet little town park, but there was always something a bit eerie about it at night. The properties around the pond were large and spaced out, nestled in an upscale neighborhood where silence ruled after sundown. It was summertime and I was off from college, spending time in my favorite room of the house, our cozy sunroom with the windows wide open, letting in the gentle breeze. It was just a regular evening when I first heard the splashes. At first I thought nothing of it, ducks or geese maybe. They often fought in the pond, making noise, but this time the splashing was different, heavier, more deliberate, like something or someone was in the water. Curiosity got the best of me. I turned down the TV, leaning closer to the window, and that's when I heard it. A deep, rhythmic splashing. It wasn't an animal, this was human. Someone was swimming in our pond. Who in their right mind swims in a pond at night, I thought. I stepped outside onto the deck, the cool night air prickling my skin. The moment I switched on the lights, everything stopped. The splashing, the humming. Whoever it was, they saw me. They knew I was there. I quickly darted back inside, shutting the lights off and locking the door. Maybe it was just a neighbor, I tried to reason with myself. But it didn't sit right with me. Nobody swam in that pond, ever. I shot my brother a text asking if he thought it could be one of the neighbors. No response. I was left alone with my thoughts, the eerie silence creeping in, and the unsettling feeling that someone had been watching me. I tried to focus on my TV show, but I couldn't shake the sense that something was off. The light from the TV illuminated the room in a soft glow, but outside all was pitch black. And then I heard it, a noise. It was subtle, like the faint shuffle of feet on the deck. My heart stopped. I fumbled for the remote, shutting the TV off as the room plunged into darkness. In the silence that followed, I heard it, heavy breathing, right outside the window. Someone was there. Someone was standing right outside, breathing heavily as if they were watching, waiting. I froze, my body sinking into the couch. Should I move? Should I scream? And then, cutting through the darkness, a voice, a deep, low voice said, "I see you." I panicked. My mind raced. Was it Paul, our neighbor? "Paul, is that you?" I called out, hoping against hope that it was just him playing some sick joke. No answer. Just footsteps, soft and deliberate, fading away into the night. My heart pounded in my chest, but I stayed put, too terrified to move. Minutes passed, or maybe it was hours. I couldn't tell. Eventually, I mustered the courage to check the doors. Every lock was secure. I texted my family, desperate for some advice. My dad, ever the practical one, told me to man up and check outside. Reluctantly, I grabbed the biggest kitchen knife I could find and stepped onto the deck, the cool night air biting at my skin. The sight that greeted me made my blood run cold, wet, barefoot footprints leading around the deck. And as I followed the trail, I saw him. Just over the edge of the deck, peeking from the ground below, were two eyes staring at me. I ran. I called 911 before I even told my parents. The police came, did a sweep of the property, and asked if we had any enemies or problem neighbors. Of course we didn't. After they left, I locked every door, shut every window, and stayed up the rest of the night, jumping at every creak and rustle. The next morning, the sunlight brought relief, but the fear still lingered. That man never came back, or at least I never saw him again. We still don't know who it was. All I know is, I'll never forget that voice in the dark whispering, "I see you." It was a quiet evening, and I was cooking dinner when I heard the knock again. I froze. This was the second night in a row, and something about it felt off. There was no peephole, no window to peek through, and I wasn't about to open the door without knowing who was out there. The storm door didn't even lock, which only made me more uneasy. I called my parents, seeking advice. My dad, a retired police officer, gave me the blunt truth. The police wouldn't be much help unless they caught the person in the act. His advice was simple: stay inside, don't open the door, and avoid going out late at night for a while. If things didn't improve, he'd come to stay with me for a few days. It wasn't much reassurance, but I followed his guidance. The next morning, I nervously checked the storm door. My heart sank when I saw another note stuck to the glass. This one was worse than the last. It read, "I like to watch you." I snapped a picture and sent it to my family and my friend Michelle. I asked Michelle if she had any issues with stalkers, but she seemed shocked and assured me she didn't. Still, I wasn't convinced. That evening, I left a note on the door. "If you're looking for Michelle, she doesn't live here. She just rents this house. If you keep coming here, I'll report you to the police." Leaving that note gave me some comfort. I hoped it would be enough to scare them off. The night passed without a knock, and for the first time in days, I felt some peace. But the next morning, when I went to remove my note from the door, I realized it wasn't mine. It was another message, and this one was worse. It read, "I'm not looking for Michelle, I'm looking for you." And then, chillingly, it mentioned my name. "I like watching you," it said. I immediately sent the note to my dad, feeling a wave of nausea hit me. He packed a bag and drove up that same day. By the time I got home from work, he was already there, waiting. We decided to call the police together, hoping they could catch the person that night. Only one officer came by. My dad said it must have been a busy night, but having him there helped. That night, my dad sat outside for hours while I tried to sleep. Thankfully, there were no more knocks or notes. Within a few days, I packed up my things and moved out. Michelle was understanding, and I left that house behind. Whoever had been watching me didn't follow, which ruled out the possibility of it being someone I knew, like a coworker. I'll probably never know who it was, and maybe that's for the best. Then there was that time in college. I was a bit more reckless back then. I went to school in California, where the culture was open and carefree, at least on the surface. It was my sophomore year when I got tired of the usual frat scene and decided to try my luck on Tinder. It wasn't long before I matched with someone. We hit it off and decided to meet up at a local bar called Tap House. I arrived early, eager to impress, and secured a pool table. An hour passed, and I started to think I'd been stood up when finally I got a message. She had just arrived. We got drinks, played some pool, and started to get to know each other. She was Latina, a heavy drinker, and wild. At one point, she asked for my Instagram, and within seconds of giving it to her, she sent me a collection of explicit photos. I was confused, but too drunk to care. Then she said, "Your turn." In my drunken state, it didn't even occur to me how strange it was to be exchanging pictures while sitting 5 feet apart, but I went along with it, not thinking twice. We laughed it off, had more drinks, and eventually, she invited me to her place. I agreed. We took an Uber to her apartment in Oakland. The red flag should have been flying the moment we crossed into the area, but I was too far gone to notice. When we arrived, she unlocked the door and let me walk in first. I took a few steps inside, and suddenly the room lit up. To my horror, 2 massive bald men were standing in front of the door. Another one was in front of me. The girl was nowhere to be seen. The guy closest to me started talking, telling me my name, birthday, age. Then he said the girl I had just been with was 17, meaning I had sent explicit pictures to a minor. My stomach dropped. They demanded I work for them, sell drugs at my fraternity and university. The 2 guys behind me took my phone, wallet, and keys. I felt trapped, but somehow, when I saw a sliver of opportunity, I bolted. I don't know how I made it out, but I ran as fast as I could. Eventually, I found a house, banged on the door, and begged for help. They let me call 911. By the time the police got involved, the apartment was deserted. The investigation turned up nothing, and the case faded into the chaos of Oakland's underworld. I never used a dating app again. I made plenty of mistakes, but I'm alive to tell the tale, though I still wonder who or what was lurking behind those doors. This story takes place when I was just a little kid living in our old house in Suffolk County, Long Island. I must have been around 6 or 7 years old. My older brother and I shared a bedroom on the top floor, which used to be a separate apartment that our dad rented out to an old lady until she moved out. After that, the upstairs became mainly our space. The layout was pretty simple. At the top of the stairs, our bedroom was on the left. It used to be the old woman's living room. Straight ahead was the bathroom, and to the right was an extra kitchen and a small bedroom. Our room was huge and filled with a million toys, including 2 parallel crawl spaces on opposite sides where we stashed even more toys and board games. Among all those toys, there was one that stood out, a race car with a bunch of buttons. Pressing those buttons made the car's lights flash and played various sound effects like honking, revving, driving noises, and even a little rock song. It had been a gift to my brother when he was younger, so we'd had it for ages. One random night, while my brother and I were lying in bed, not quite asleep, something startled us. Out of nowhere, the loud revving sound of that toy car filled the room, lights flashing. I sat up, terrified, and accused my brother Luke of trying to scare me. He was laughing hysterically, insisting he hadn't touched it. The car finally went quiet, but I was shaken. Despite my fear, I eventually fell asleep. However, not long after that, something else happened. One night, Luke and I were in bed again when we heard a strange thud in the room. Luke couldn't resist teasing me, claiming there was a ghost. I yelled at him to be quiet or I'd tell Mom. Then we both noticed a light flickering in the corner of the room. It was the toy car again. I jumped out of bed and bolted downstairs, calling for my mom. I rushed into my parents' room, breathless, probably rambling about how there was a ghost in our room. Luke followed me in, and my mom, thinking he was just trying to scare me, told him to knock it off. Luke replied, "How could I turn on the lights from my bed?" That night I was too scared to sleep upstairs, so I crashed in my parents' room. Time passed, and nothing happened until one night when Luke wasn't home. He must have been at a sleepover. I was alone in our room and had long since tucked the race car away in the small bedroom across the hall because it scared me. After my mom kissed me goodnight, I asked her to leave the door open, always uneasy when alone. I rolled over trying to sleep, but the fear kept me wide awake. Suddenly I heard a sound from down the hall. I turned to face the door, and to my horror, the toy car rolled into the room with its lights on. I screamed from the depths of my stomach, crying for my mom, pressing myself against the wall. Moments later, my parents rushed upstairs. They saw the car on the floor, and I yelled that someone had pushed it into the room. My dad checked all the other rooms, but found no one there. There were only a few places to hide, like under the beds or in the closets, and he checked them all. I could only imagine what my parents thought in that moment. On one hand, they probably chalked it up to a malfunctioning toy or my imagination. But on the other hand, they must have felt a bit unnerved. After all, that car didn't have any features that would allow it to move on its own. To help ease my fears, my dad smashed the toy and tossed it in the neighbor's trash. For a while, I slept in their room until my dad finally insisted I return to my own. That experience is the reason I believe in the paranormal and the idea that something exists